So I figured that the first thing I should say to people watching this is that Sonu and I met 40 years ago when we were a little bit younger at university doing philosophy. And one of the things right back at that time that I associate with you, amongst other things, is this fascination with Carl Jung. And then I've just watched your life happen from a distance around this incredible work you've done around Carl Jung. So we had a chance to catch up personally a few weeks back, which was nice. So I want to dive straight in. And I said to you then, and you were kind enough to play along, say that you'd be willing to do this. Normally, what I want to do is come in and say, and I do want to do this with you, Sonu, in a minute, but I come in with, okay, so here we are, we're alive. In our case, we've been living quite a long while. What the hell do you think it is? But for this special conversation, I'm wondering if you could have a stab at, for the first part of the conversation, giving what you think might be Carl Jung's answer, if I were to have the good fortune to ask him that question.
I could have a go.
Yeah, I'd be fascinated to hear.
In effect, the first question is easier than the second question in terms of what I think.
Okay, brilliant.
I think that where Jung eventually got to was that becoming aware, becoming conscious, being and developing awareness, developing consciousness was not something that was just of individual benefit, but it was part and parcel of, you could say, life becoming aware of itself.
Do you mean that in a kind of like an evolutionary way, that life had evolved to become aware of itself through us?
I mean, he means that in a full sociological manner, in terms of the divine becoming aware of itself through the mirror of creation.
Okay, all right. So take me through what he means then by the word divine. There's one question I've always wanted to ask you, which I can just jump straight in and ask. Oh, it's always puzzled me. I remember years and years and years and years ago when I was looking at Jung, decades, and that famous interview where he says something like, I don't believe in God, I know that God exists. And I've always been really intrigued as exactly what he meant by that, and whether it should be taken on face value, or, and you know, so what does he mean by God or the divine, would you say, in his vision of what this is?
I think it's a comment that should just be taken at first value.
Okay,
it's what it says on what it says on the tin in terms of.
So it's a statement of kind of gnosis.
Yeah, just as simple as that.
And what does he mean by it? What does he mean by God or divine?
Existence.
So he's seeing that
as
the ground of existence coming to know itself.
Yeah.
And that's God coming to know itself through us.
Yeah. In a way, he's positing in his late book, Answer to Job, a situation of divine unconsciousness or divine unknowing.
Yep.
That needs human awareness.
Yep.
To mirror back creation.
Yeah, that's a beautiful vision. It's one I really resonate with. My own position, I don't want to get into it now, has kind of moved on a bit, but fundamentally, that is something which is that idea, I think, has probably dominated most of my life, actually, that kind of like vision of this unfolding. And so how does that feel? How has hanging out with someone like Carl Jung impacted you? What do you where have you ended up with it?
I mean, that sort of reply, I mean, sort of the vision that he has is something I respect, but it's too big for me in the sense all I can see is, okay, one tries to, in one's life and endeavor, try to make some incremental good, however small it may be, in whatever kind of capacity one can do it, and hope it's a benefit for others. If it is or not is just for others to say, in terms of the things that you have a kind of one's own peculiarities often uniquely enable one to do. And I think it's best served to try to contribute through those means, in the sense of, like, in terms of what I've engaged in terms of scholarship and teaching. I'm sure in many respects people could say, when you look at the state of the world, why don't you go and, like, help out in war zones, or help out with famines? Or I think the things, if you're looking at sort of like a utilitarian framework, would be far more valuable or sensible things to do. And I'm not saying that they're not, but I tend to think just trying to contribute in ways that you might be uniquely able to do,
I love that.
Is the best use of your limited capacities. The things you can do, there are other things that are often more sensible things that many other people can do much better than you or I can.
I feel the same.
Don't have those skill sets.
So why, looking back now, do you feel like, what was the Carl Jung thing? Why were you doing so young into Carl Jung, and why have you given so much of your life to his exposing his ideas and working on his ideas?
I think the first point of the inception, which would have been around the time when we started talking, that part is easy to map, in the sense, having just come back from India, becoming interested in Indian thought and mysticism, visiting some ashrams like the Rajneesh ashram in Pune, and speaking to an uncle that was a yogi, and being told, okay, you have to go and find a guru and just submit to them, and that's the way forward. And finding, I've been starting to think for myself, and that was not something that I wanted to stop. And reading Heraclitus and Nietzsche's "Thus Spoke Zarathustra," that, well, Western philosophy is anything like that, better go and study philosophy. So that's how I ended up doing that. I didn't realize I was really dealing with something a bit like the alpha and omega of European thought, the grand arc of philosophy. And that was not exactly what analytic philosophy in Bristol was really going down, but I got a hell of a lot out of it anyway. But so it was that point of Western rationalism on the one side, or my own rationalism, and being attracted towards the mysteries, shall we say, in a broad sensual sense. And in that context, reading Jung's commentary to The Secret of the Gold Flower with Richard Wilhelm, I thought, okay, wow, this is some point of mediation. There is maybe a middle way that means you can approach these in a rational way that in a way respects both perspectives. And at that stage, I mean, I didn't know what psychology was. That was the first time I came across, okay, well, there is psychology as opposed to just philosophy and religious or mystical traditions.
I've just interrupt you for a second, Sonu, just to tell you the little story, because you talk about Bristol. I did psychology at Bristol for the first year and dropped it. And one of the reasons I dropped it is because the professor of psychology at the first meeting said to me, so what's your interest in psychology? And I said, well, I'm really interested in Carl Jung. And he looked at me with complete disgust and went, oh, armchair psychology. And I just thought, yeah, that's not going to be the psychology that I want to study here, is it? That was the environment we were in, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, go on, please. Carry on.
Yeah, so that was the point of inception.
Right.
And then I got into it, and more and more as years went by, I was finding myself thinking outside of it, in the sense of just looking at the whole field of psychology and psychotherapy. It looked like a complete mess in terms of a Tower of Babel. Not to say there weren't interesting theories, people doing fine therapy and so forth, but just the whole field at a level seemed a mess. And I just then got more and more interested in the history of psychology. And that was like a turn towards studying the history of psychology, that sort of deepened sort of the trajectory I was on.
And let me just return to something earlier in your conversation, just because it's so sweet, I can't let it go. Which is, I don't think I'd really noticed before, but it's so obvious that given our, Freke's an old Germanic name, and given our ethnicity, when we met very shortly afterwards, when we were doing things together, you were diving into Carl Jung, and I was following an Indian guru, which says something about. But very much where I've ended up going is very much trying to bring together, like you said, the mystical and the rational, the ability to be able to think clearly about these things, science, and Carl Jung always seemed like a real hero in that. For mystics, I'm never sure he is for scientists, but for mystics or esotericists, he's always like, yeah, Carl Jung, he was so important. And well, how do you, when you look back now, I mean, you're a professional in this field, I don't know if I can ask you this question, how significant do you think his thought is?
Well, in a way, I think that popular perception is actually intuitively quite correct.
Yeah.
In terms of the more I've sort of gone into it, the work I published and researched, it's like, it is quite clear that there is what I call an esoteric Jung and an exoteric Jung, and the Jung of the conceptual works is the exoteric Jung. The esoteric Jung was the Jung of the Red Book and the Black Books. And what he was trying to do with the exoteric works was, in a way, trying to find a voice in the contemporary language, trying to find a way to, you could say, mediate as much as he could of that wider universe into a language that he hoped would be acceptable to a medico-scientific audience, in a way, to try to present it in terms that he thought could be acceptable. So there always was, which I think readers intuit, a wider background that he was trying to convey in psychological terminology, which was ultimately a makeshift.
How did he, do you think, how is that? I mean, when I did a little while back, I did a TED talk at Berkeley. And one of the things I mentioned was, because I've been trying to just understand my funny life, all of these things that have happened, some things that happened together all those years ago, that level of the level of life, which is both mechanical, and the level of life which is magical, and the way they coexist and how that can be. And I was mentioning synchronicity, probably Jung's most famous thing. And it dawned on me that the example I could use was actually what happened with Carl Jung, because when I was at, this was before I met you. So this was before I went to university, because I took a few years off, and I was in an occult community, and we were called Dodec Orion, and we were studying various Egyptian stuff. And I was sitting on my bed, meditating. Over my head was a big old shelf, which I put up. I'm the most impractical person in the world, and I put up this shelf for all my books. And late at night, a concrete train would go through 11 o'clock every night, and the whole place would shake. And this particular night, it shook so bad that the shelf really, really wobbled. And this massive book, which was Mysterium Conjunctionis from the collected works, fell off the shelf and opened up in front of me on a passage about the Egyptian mysteries that the Egyptian god I was meditating on. So that, now, how he's introducing that idea, he's obviously experiencing that, he obviously lives a magical life, he's got all those things which led him through to the Gnostics, all of that. How do you think he is accounting for both the mechanical and the magical nature of existence?
That's
Does he have an account, or is he just going, look, they're both there?
In a way, that's the theme of his collaboration with Pauli. He publishes the synchronicity paper and the interpretation of nature and the psyche. And what I quite like is there was an earlier title that they discarded, which was just called Papers in Natural Philosophy. Where there's quite clearly this self-conscious turning back the clock to a new natural philosophy.
Yeah.
There's Pauli's paper on Kepler and flood and so forth. And in a way, Jung is quite aware that he's in effect trying to validate the old doctrine of correspondences,
right?
Swedenborgian mirroring of the inside and the outside and so forth. Right. The collaboration and interest of Pauli, who also was someone where these sort of things happened all the time, and that was known in the physics community, was part of that sense of, okay, I'm now dealing with someone that's a heavyweight nuclear physicist, where I can really legitimate this, who takes this stuff seriously in a way that is congruent with that. And in that book, he in effect puts two theories forward. One is that synchronicity is like in a way, we live in a mechanical Newtonian universe most of the time, and there's certain things that happened, like a constellation of an archetype, which disrupts that, and something, you could say, magical happens. And he puts forward, I think, a theory that is more interesting, and I think that is, in a way, more, in a certain sense, congruent with where Pauli is headed, towards to say, well, there is like an acausal connection that's there all the time, only we don't perceive it.
Yeah.
And I think that is the most interesting one. So rather than we're in, as it were, mechanics, and then there's a volcano that's erupting that disrupts it, it's like, say, okay, there are connections weaving their way the whole time, but most of the time, for most people, they're obscured.
Yeah.
It's just how things hang together.
Yeah. 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 That's in my last book, Soul Story. That was exactly what I was trying to explore, probably influenced by Carl Jung from way back, was the idea that what I was trying to do there was put it in an evolutionary context and go, well, maybe the psyche, which seems obviously to have evolved from the biological level, is creating its own ecology, its own level of information. And there's a vast ecosystem of psyche in which we're all enmeshed right now. We're enmeshed in it all the time. And that's a level of meaning or narrative. And therefore, you could say that the old theory for me was one I was exploring, was the old idea you get in Hindu philosophy and others of life is like a dream. Mm-hmm. And I started twitching it around and going, maybe life has evolved into a dream. So that there's layers of this process of evolution which are mechanical-ish, and then there's levels which are biological, and there's levels which are narrative, and they're all influencing each other. It's not just all coming from the bottom up. So that narrative level is constantly affecting everything that happens, just like you said, but mainly you don't notice it. And then occasionally you really notice, and you notice because it's narrative, because it's story, and like you said, it's meaningful. And that's why I love the story with the book, because it's a lovely synchronicity, but it wasn't any book. It was bloody Carl Jung's book, and it was Mysterium Conjunctionis. And so it had all of those elements of everything for that moment. The narrative just went boom. And I was doing something to encourage that. I was actually open to it. I was focusing on the psyche. So which is really taking that idea and putting it in a kind of a evolutionary context.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just give a small example that comes to mind of that. It's like on my Windows computer, it sometimes, I think every month or so, or a few weeks, it sometimes flashes up randomly with a photo. It says, look back over your memories. It's just looking over my hard drive of all the photos on it. And I think it was the first anniversary of my mother's death, and the photo that came up that day was my mother, and it said, "Look back at your memories." And that was so striking, given the amount of images that are on my on my machine.
And to jump from the sublime in your case to the kind of almost ridiculous as a way of getting that, the analogy often which comes to mind for me is, well, a little while back I was looking at a shirt. I forget the manufacturer. I quite like this shirt. I thought I might buy this shirt, and I hadn't done it. And then I started noticing that whenever I was on a social media thing, I'd get shown similar shirts or shirts like it. Now, of course, if you didn't know what was happening, you'd think, wow, that's amazing. But because you know, no, there's a whole informational system behind there, which is responding to you by going, hey, fancy this shirt? How about this shirt? And it feels like that's a way we can understand that process of the synchronous, the magical.
Yeah.
Because if there's an informational system behind this, which is operating on that level as well, then the fact that every now and again it shows up in dramatic fashion becomes no less magical, but it doesn't become just an anomaly to be ignored.
Sure, it's just a reminder, stuff that's always going on in the background.
Isn't that the biggest thing with it? I can remember when I was much younger, again before I met you, I went through a phase where I'd withdrawn after the experience in the occult community. I withdrew into kind of meditative recluse for 9 months a year, and I was started, and for various reasons, I was a bit low when I started that. And I noticed that I would do the I Ching or the tarot like every day. And the reason I was doing it was simply to see the magic work. Because you'd see the magic and go, oh, it's okay. I don't live in a meaningless, empty universe. The magic works. And it would work in dramatic fashion as a way of focusing that. And would you say that's what Carl Jung was into with the Ching and all of that stuff, the I Ching?
In a way, but he wouldn't. I remember talking once to his daughter and said she, one of his daughters, who said he would use it only at specific events or serious junctures. He was not someone that would be using that on a regular basis.
Yeah. I was in my own defense, I was like 18 and knew no better, but
I was a junkie those days on that stuff.
It pulls you in for that very reason, doesn't it? Because you feel like you're following some thread, which can.
And there's an interesting letter that he wrote at a certain point where he said, he wrote someone saying he'd stop using it because he realized he preferred to learn how to walk in the dark.
I never use it now. Haven't done for
marvelous expression.
It must be it's decades since I've used any of them. Do you ever use those things?
No, but it's in a way a sense of thinking, okay, my experience of using it is in a way, if you're getting to that point of quietening yourself down, you in a way know the answer.
Yes,
that's there. It's realizing, okay, find a way to quieten down and to try to move oneself out of one's immediate kind of turmoil and try to figure out what it is you should do.
Do you feel? I often feel with figures, and I know that there's a lot of fantasy in a just an arbitrary sense to all of this, of course. But when I come across people who I feel have the same gnosis, who are asking the same questions, they feel like the phrase I used to have when I was young was the other family. Like, oh, I found one. And I just love looking at their pictures. And I feel this personal connection with them. And I had that definitely, for years I called him Uncle Carl. Because it's like it was that feeling of he was an older man who'd opened it all up and I could run behind him along with these other figures that I felt that with. And do you feel like a personal connection with him? I'm not trying to elevate him to anything more than a human being or hero, but just in terms of a man who lived before you, do you?
Familiarity is the way I'd put it.
Yeah.
Familiarity.
Yeah, you feel familiar with him.
Yeah.
Death. he had a near-death experience. Is that right?
I think you would describe it as a death experience, not a
Okay.
near-death experience. So in his view, he died and came back.
All right.
And he describes it as the most blissful experience of his life.
How old was he?
He was in his 60s.
Right. And where do you think he ended up with death? What was his place?
He reached a view of, I'd say, a conviction in reincarnation, and a sense, in terms of his, you could say, his private kind of system of one lands up on Earth to try to answer questions that are posed by one's ancestors, and that he would rest up a while until he was needed to come back and resolve some questions that he was well placed to do.
So I feel like I've set you up now, but I'm going to ask you anyway, because part of the thing when I asked you, do you feel a personal connection with him, is often with these figures, and from a distance, obviously, I feel a sense of connection with them, not as individuals who have gone, but individuals who still exist. And so I've got two questions. One, does that impact on you at all, that you have that sense that, that Carlness is in this psychic space still?
That I don't have a direct sense of. I have a sense of the world he's trying to mediate, i.e. the stuff he was into and trying to mediate, and the presence of that. And I have a sense of should I put it, that form of mediation is something real in the world, i.e. that means something to people. It's like, let's use an example. I remember years ago visiting the Kali temple in Calcutta. It was really quite a powerful experience. It's like, you see the force. I'm not going to use the word belief, because belief is often used in a cognitive sense, as if something is just a mere mental mindset. You see the force of the worship towards the idol of the deity, the prayers, the request for mediation. And that's something that's real in the world, regardless of whether you believe in it or not, or whether you assent to it. That in itself creates a power. It creates an energy. It creates a mana.
And what about yourself, Sonu? Where have you ended up? Where I guess the next part of the adventure is going to involve death one way or another. What's your thought on death and reincarnation and all those issues?
I haven't a clue. So,
do you even have a like an intuition, or literally like agnostic, or do you have a hunch or anything?
I think it's probably not the end of the story, but I've no idea.
Well, that's a pretty big hunch.
Where that goes, that's where I would lean.
Okay, well that's pretty deep, actually, to be able to say it's not the end of the story, but I don't know what that means. I think that's quite a deep. That seems a strong response. So, and yeah, I mean, more and more, the work that I've done over the last, I haven't published a book for ages, and it's because I've been doing so much work to be ready to do something new. But this latest phase goes back to the death of my parents, really, where it was such a profound experience that in what I think I set out to do with this evolutionary philosophy was to try and create a view of the survival of the psyche or the soul, which you could hold your head up and go, it's perfectly reasonable and rational to hold this view. It may be wrong, it may be right, but it's not woo-woo, it's not stupid. We can make sense of it. And that's what I've been doing, really, is making sense of it. So my hunch is that it's not the end of the story. And that what we're seeing with the sort of experiences, that near-death experiences, death experiences, is people, the world we're already in, continuing. So for me, it would be like, well, what's death? Well, I'm experiencing two worlds right now. One is material, one is not material. It's imaginal or ideational. It's full of images, and I can go off into that world in dreams and in visions and in meditation and in shamanic practices and ayahuasca or whatever it is. So my hunch about death is, well, when the body ceases, this experience will stop. But this experience will get more vivid, just like it's fairly vivid now. But when I close down the biology, it gets very vivid in meditation or in dreams and sleep and so forth. So that what is being experienced is the soulscapes of the imaginal, of the psyche, which look to me as if the psyche has arisen originally as images of the sensory world through which we can reflect on how we ideate unconsciously, and make that unconscious ideation conscious through images and then words. And yet that's evolves exponentially so much that it's now a whole domain. And my sense is what the esoteric and the spiritual have been exploring all this time, and what's intrigued me and why my life has been dominated by it, is to explore the reality of that realm. And the switch that's happened in my own thinking is going, but what if that's not some permanent reality from which we've fallen, which tends to be most of the ancient myths, but rather it's something which has evolved, like everything. And there's one process of evolution in which everything that has any quality at all is taking shape. And I remember Carl Jung, actually, I'm pretty sure, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I remember a quote of him going, look, there must be something which connects the fact that right now I'm thinking thoughts and my mouth is moving and air is going to you and we're connecting so kind of soul to soul right now. There must be something which connects the material and the immaterial. And my own hunch is that the concept which can do that for us is this concept of information. That's why I was interested in Pauli, that now we see actually the material reality as informational. We can see different levels of information, and because we're literally connecting through information right now, it becomes an easy metaphor to go, well, there's another level of information, and that level of information is the psyche or the soul. And it's full of images of the sensory world, but it's taken on its own reality. And the big shift for me as well, it's where I shifted away from the mythos that you were talking about, with the divine is seeking itself, is the unconscious divine is becoming conscious of itself. It's kind of the same as that, except it no longer feels like calling the ground divine is the right word. Because it feels like if you take a radical evolutionary view, which is what I'm exploring, then the ground is the simplest thing you can imagine. And for me, the word I use is being. That the ground is existence. It exists. And then from that, it's taking on information. It's a field of being taking on information, which will evolve onto all these levels. And my guess is that the thing we experience as God, or I certainly do, that huge, loving, benevolent presence, isn't where it starts. It's where it's going.
That's great. I mean, at a purely speculative level, the way what sort of lines I speculate on is taking my cue from William James's radical empiricism, and to say, look, okay, dualism is you will never solve mind-body problem because it's a problem created by your conceptual systems that really, when you look at it, you're dealing with what he calls pure experience. There is not like two substances that you're trying to look at how they interact or join. There's not what he calls an inner bifurcation in experience. They're not two realms.
Yeah.
So the area that I'm interested, again, speculating on, is like modes of transition from more, you could say, substantial to more subtle layers.
Yeah.
And it seems to have been interested in Ayurveda, which is something that, as a medical system, works on both layers at the same time. It's a monistic system. There's not a mind-body separation, and a sense that things can move both ways. In a way, the substantial can become more subtle, and the subtle can become more substantial. I mean, you're a musician. You know, when you play an instrument, where is there a difference between? It's not like there's a mental emotion that gets transferred to a physical movement that gets retransferred to a mental emotion. It's all one thing. It's not like there's like it's moving from up and down from one
beautiful
box
analogy
to another, but there's just one movement.
So the shift there, which feels like the biggest thing that we know that our ancestors up till 100 years ago didn't know, was in the same way, is that we live in a process. The whole universe is this evolutionary process. And so that's made me shift in my thinking from the idea that there's a oneness of everything to, there's a oneness of becoming.
Yeah.
That there's one process in which the simplest possible thing is becoming richer and richer. And like you said, emerging onto all of these new levels. So you've got a quantum informational level, you've got a physical level, you've got a biological level, and of course all the levels in between them as a spectrum. And then this other thing, which when I was doing the Gnostics, when I was writing about the Gnostics, that was when I really started thinking, oh, look, it's a mistake to keep thinking about the psyche as the kind of like I come across a lot the idea that the psyche is kind of the inside of the brain, as if it has a biological thing on the outside and then there's an inner subjectivity, which is the psyche. And I don't think that at all. I think the psyche is a whole new level of information with its own objective quality and subjective quality, as it were. It's information on another level. And it's the sensory experience of the biological experience, which is being mediated by the neurological network. And then the ideational network, which has emerged from it, is taking us into a completely different domain, which is the one that you explore in those profound spiritual experiences and psychedelics and all the rest of it. And that seems to be, and that my sense is that's what Jung was pushing into, was that realm.
Yeah, he was. I mean, my sense, following again from James, is to speak in less ontological terms and more pragmatic terms. The way he put it would be, okay, there are certain types of phenomena where you could say mind talk works effectively, and there are other kinds of talk where physicalist mechanics works effectively. It's not presuming whether they are or are not what they are or are not at an ontological level, but we find it effective to talk in these ways about these sorts of states.
But then you have to go, why? So it does say something about, I mean, when I look at my experience, there's a hell of a difference between my hand and then my idea of my hand. If I imagine my hand, I mean, there's a fundamental difference there, isn't it? Don't you think?
I would put that at levels of what I call of mediation, of that levels of subtlety.
Yes, but experientially, we've reached a new level, haven't we? Of something.
We experience the whole spectrum.
Yeah,
the whole time. But in terms of evolution, I was struck. I recently read this Thomas Hertog's collaboration with Stephen Hawking in terms of his new kind of theory of time, and I found it really quite fascinating because the main premise, he argues, that Hawking came to revise this whole kind of like cosmology, if you will, and what they develop in that book is a notion of you're not dealing with impermanent, so intemporal laws in which existence then has to follow the template and work itself out in, but a notion where the laws of physics are evolutionary.
He did that. So one of the key ideas, which it was in Soul Story, so it's 10 years ago for me, is exactly that. And I associate it with going back to Rupert Sheldrake, the biologist, and before that to Peirce, Charles Sanders Peirce, and in physics with Lee Smolin. But I didn't know, that is news to me, big news, that Hawking had gone down that road. Because again, it makes, to me, it's like, look, if everything is evolutionary, everything is evolutionary, everything, including God. And then, and so the idea that that we're in a kind of that the very process itself is learning, that it's not created by an intelligence, it's the evolution of intelligence, and that it's constantly setting up patterns. I use the word passivity that the patterns of the past haven't gone anywhere. And when I'm meeting you, it's like I can see all of the past. It's like I'm meeting Sonu right back from when I first met him. It's all there. And it's informing the present. That seems a huge, important jump. That I'm so pleased to hear that he's saying that. And
so it's a notion that these laws itself are evolutionary and of outcomes of increasing complexity in which things could have worked out in a different way. But this is where, in a way, where the cards fell.
So just to jump to Uncle Carl, I haven't, you tell me, because I really don't know, but in that evolutionary process, it feels like it's constantly throwing up new things. It's repeating the past in a new way. And so you've got that passivity, everything carries on, this is going to fall, all of that stuff. And then as it evolves, there's always newness, because all the relationships between systems is moving and changing all the time. And that throws up new possibilities. And if they work out, if they can fit in, they continue. And then it gets to our level and the same thing is happening. It's just that it's very fast, like it's happening now. We're evolving as we speak in terms of the psyche. I'm different for my conversation with you, for sure. And then with the evolution of the psyche, if what we're witnessing is like an ecosystem, like with biology, then the foundations, the very first ideas are still there, and they're structuring all the later ideas, which like the phylogenetic tree, but with ideas. And what struck me, that what Carl Jung was onto with archetypes was like the first ideas. Like these are the structural ideas from which all other ideas are related. Just like you could go back to the common ancestor of the single cell or the early forms of life from which all life comes. These are structural ideas, which there must have been a time, mustn't there? If ideas have evolved, there was the first idea, the second idea, the third, and that's an awesome thought, from whichever, and we're still connected to that because we are psychobiological systems.
I was reminded by there's an expression of Miles Davis where he says in his memoirs, in using, I think if I recall correctly, in Miles' classic lingo, that shit we did was so bad, it must be still out there in the universe. The music was so great. It could not have it could not have disappeared.
It's something, there's a huge psychological or spiritual even shift. If you change the notion of time so that time doesn't pass, it accumulates. So there's just more of it. And the reason that the universe is like this now and was just hydrogen 4 billion years ago is because there's so much more information which is accumulated. And the fact that the reason that you are now like you are and I'm like I am, both in our physical appearance but also in our soul, is because of all that time that's accumulated. And that, the intuition that I have is that nothing is lost. It's impossible. that your very identity is, that Sonu is a relationship between a particular system which has arisen. I don't mean that system in some mechanical sense, but which has arisen in relationship with the universe. So you're the universe in relationship with itself, so am I, but we're particular things in relationship to the whole. And my identity is everything that's ever happened in that relationship. Every single thing is what makes Tim Tim, and why he speaks in this way and does this funny thing with his hands, and and you the same.
Yeah.
And there's something very redemptive about that thought somehow. That nothing is, that everything, that you are. And I think the other thing is, well, my book Soul Story, I wanted to call it Soul Formation. For various reasons, the title is too long for their design, but because it feels like what we're doing is forming ourselves. If you are made of everything, if you are a relationship with the universe and you're made of everything you've ever experienced, and so am I, then we are forming ourselves now. We already exist in each other. Now we re-exist in each other, and the choice that you made to say yes, I'll have this conversation, has formed you in a different way than if you hadn't made that choice.
I think that's well put. In terms of, it's what Bergson called creative evolution.
Yeah. It's a beautiful vision. I guess the thing. Well, let me just come in on this towards the end of our time together. Is well, there's so many things I'd like to ask you about. When you've lived a life, and we've both done that now, and we last spent a lot of time together when we hadn't lived a life, really, and now we have. I think one of the things which I had a bit maybe was looking at older people was, it kind of runs out, or I could see that there was people who were disappointed with life or ground down by it. But thus far, I have to say, it just gets more and more full on, more mysterious, more, I feel like I know so much more, and the more I know, the more I don't know, and the richness of it and the relationship with God, let's say, just has been extraordinary. And that's why it's been so lovely hearing all the things that you've been saying, because I hear in your voice, correct me if I'm wrong, I love that there's a kind of humility in the view you have, which I really like. Really warms me.
I think I know a lot less than I thought I knew when we first met, because come up with multiple certainties. They might have only lasted a week, but this time they were passionately kind of sort of put forward. So yeah, in terms of my work as studying history of psychology and psychiatry, it's part of an attempt to show what we take to be knowledges are contingent and are not fixed, and things are open.
Yeah.
To think about how systems of thought are created, the all aleatory trajectories that give rise to them, but what it's taken to be certainties or not so.
And does we talked about Carl Jung and what he meant by God. Does that is a difficult word, to be honest with you. I do trouble with the word, but that experience of something more than, does that mean something to you?
The way I put it is, I don't think life can be understood in human terms alone. In terms of humanism,
right?
There is some beyond. What that beyond is called varies in the great and the not so great religious traditions. I don't know what it is. I don't have any positive X. I probably explore that more, try to give voice to that in poems, which try to express the best expression I can have. In terms of a poetics. So
in terms of experience, there's something there, isn't there, that you want to express?
Well, my sense that it can't be understood in human terms alone. I don't know what the broader terms are.
Yeah.
But that's enough for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably both of us let go the idea of this rather naive idea of certainty, which sometimes is out there. For me, it's like it's quite different. It's like the enormity of the mystery, and then I get to do my best to find ways of ideating it which can account for what I've experienced and open up new experiences the best I can for now.
Yeah.
I've done a whole series, I'm going to do a whole new more, which has been quite interesting, of coming out with why I was wrong about, because I've had to come out with a number of things in my books and go, I've written 35 books and 34 of them are wrong, and about a big idea, and that's happening more. It's happening more and more and more.
But maybe they're not. I mean, I say that from the point of view that there was I was reading a piece by the great Portuguese poet Fernando Pessoa, and he was citing a philosopher called Suarez, if I pronounce it correctly. And he was like, who said Socrates was only a semi-skeptic because he knew that he didn't know, but there's certainty in that. A full skeptic doesn't even know if they know. So it's like, maybe you know. So even to say 34 are wrong is to say there's certainties.
The big shift for me was I use a lot of etymology to help me with ideas. Was tracing the etymology of the word true and truth, and to the idea that something was true if it was trustworthy, like a true friend. It's trustworthy. And that really, kind of pragmatic, I guess, approach really, really makes things clear for me, because it just feels like I'm looking for them. I'm not looking, the whole idea of it kind of being certain. I don't even know what that means. What it looks to me like is to understand it in the way that is most trustworthy. And that I can, and if there's something more trustworthy, and can then instantly to change to that. And the way in which, when you do shift, reality shifts. But probably the biggest thing, actually, for me, has been the thing which we were exploring together when we first met, and which goes back for me to very young, which was the realization, it's obvious, but the realization that how I experience life to be is not consistent, that I can literally shift my state and be in something ecstatic and sublime and have a very view that comes from there, or I can be very closed down and feel very and have a completely different sense of what reality is, and that shift to those deep awake states reveals another level of reality.
Just as a footnote, there was a fine book by a historian of science, Stephen Shapin, called A Social History of Truth. That notion of trust becomes uppermost, because he's basically saying, in effect, that, just to put it on a postcard, in the sense that truth was, in effect, a convention that is established by the Royal Society by trustworthy individuals, or what is taken to be truth is based on credibility and trust.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
In a learned society.
Totally. And when I try and integrate physics with spirituality, I take physics on trust. I'm not a physicist. I find the physicists I trust, and I trust them because in a critical way, and I see it differently often than they do, but nevertheless, I can't, you tell me something about Carl Jung, I'm going to believe you because I trust you. And so there's that level of trust as well, isn't it? Which goes all the way back to why it feels like we have this evolved in the first place, to enable us to navigate our lives. And whether it was like, I think the water buffaloes are down by the waterhole. I don't know, it's the 3-day walk. Is that true? Can you trust that? Yeah, here's the evidence. Look. Okay, let's start walking. Just right back to that, to now where we're speculating about, like with the image you first came in with when I talked about how Carl Jung would answer the what is life is incredible, isn't it, that we can be here discussing the nature of we are the universe. What else could we possibly be? The universe has popped up with a Tim and a Sonu. And here we've been having this conversation over these decades about what the universe is, or what we should do with it, or what really matters, and all of that. And that's, I mean, it blows my mind that is what we are. That's what's happened. It's beautiful. Well, thank you. I think that's that might be a good place to draw our conversation to an end. And I hope we get to see each other in the flesh.
And continue on another occasion.
And I look forward in another 10 years having the same conversation. And but then we'll be on some new technology. We'll be holograms in each other's room, talking away, going, "Who'd have thought this would happen?"
Yeah, well, on an Apple headset.
On a Apple headset, exactly. Yeah, probably won't be that long.
Each other's living rooms.
Yeah. It would be great. Yeah. I'm great. I just want to say, Sonu, how, I don't know how to say this in a way that comes across, but it's been such a delight to see you doing the Red Book and all the things you've done, and thinking that I knew you all those years ago, and that I saw your passion for it, and that you have done such amazing things, and that I can show off the fact that I knew you. When people talk about Jung, and it's a great, it's like, well done. That's a lot.
Same thing to you. It's like just continuing to plow one's own furrows.
Yeah, we have. It's like you can go back all that time, and if you saw those, I as I'm getting older, I see my past much less sympathetically than I used to. I look much more like a naive idiot than I did at the time, but definitely, if you went back to those two young men, I think you'd see the essence of what's come out of them, and trying to come out.
The way I put it with our other mutual friends, it's like it was a very formative ship of fools that I owe a lot to.
It really was. It was. We were lucky to find each other. Well, maybe it wasn't luck. All right, my friend, go well, and we'll speak again.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.